Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for invitation. As you said, I'm a researcher and artist, and I work in Fine Arts Academy in Katowice, Poland. And currently, I'm preparing my PhD dissertation and finally the body of art, which will be a multimodal interface. So, this crossroads of AI, art, and science is in the very core of my research. Let me begin with a claim. The real question is not what AI produces, but what kinds of relationships it generates. Why? Because the work of art, when mediated through generative models, such as ChatGPT or Stable Diffusion, no longer only rests in visible structures, images, text, or sounds. These outputs are symbolic representations, placeholders. What really matters is the underlying structure of the model, its entanglement with human intentions, and the way these systems enter social life. In other words, the highest coefficient of art now lies in how people use, misuse, and reframe these models, not in the files they produce. To understand this shift, I want to recall Jerzy Ludwiński's stages of art. In the penultimate stage, art dissolves into life itself, merging with reality and going beyond previous conceptual frameworks. The final stage is the most radical, a moment when art can no longer be described using existing paradigms or methods. Generative models accelerates precisely this scenario. They blur the boundaries between art, science, design, technology, education, and entertainment, and everyday communication. When anyone can generate a painting in the style of Rembrandt, right here, for example, as demonstrated in the next Rembrandt project, where AI analyzed hundreds of his works to produce a completely new, stylistically playful painting, or compose a new symphony in seconds. The artistic act is no longer about the crafted artifacts. Instead, it is about the choices, the framing, and, the most importantly, the relationships these acts establish with audience, with institutions, and with society. This shift has been anticipated by two important thinkers. First, Tanya Bruegera, in her research of the usership of art. She insists that the artist is not simply a creator, but initiator. The audience is not just a viewer, but a user. It is a profound reorientation. Art as tool, as platform, as catalyst for social engagement. Second, Stephen Wright, in his book, Towards a Lexicon of Usership, provides both a theoretical framework for understanding emerging challenges in contemporary art and a dictionary of new terms to describe and respond to the shifting realities of the art world. Two terms stand out. First, Slackspace, a space of freedom, a buffer zone where different logics can coexist, where users can repurpose tools without the weight of institutional constraints. Second, the coefficient of art, the degree to which something behaves like art, not in terms in form, not in its form, but in terms of its intensity of social and relational charge. If we situate generative models in this framework, we can see them not simply as plagiarism machines for productivity tools. They open spaces for experimentation where the artistic dimension lies not in a generated outputs, but in how we choose to engage with the structures. This engagement, if done consciously, in Bruegger's sense of usership, allows us to question norms, imagine alternatives, and stage new performances of authorship and community. Of course, there are real dangers. Generative models can encourage mass production of identical cliches. They are trained on enormous data sets, often without clear respect for copyrights. They destabilize academic trust. We cannot be certain anymore if students wrote a paper or delegated the task to the model. Yet if we frame the problem only in terms of control and prohibition, we miss the deeper transformation. Instead, let us consider this moment through the lens of usership. What is at stake? It's not simply originality, but the relationships these structures establish with society. It's not about the artwork themselves, but they have merged with reality, in which the act of creation is encoded in its very structure. The work of art moves outward, beyond traditional boundaries, dissolving into reality itself. The visible outputs, the GUI, the lines of codes, the generated images, texts, or sounds, are only symptoms. The true artistic structure is invisible, relational, enacted between human users, AI structures, and society at large. And this brings us back to the education. Today, generative AI appears in galleries and in biennales, yet its highest coefficient of art lies elsewhere, in programming labs, corporate infrastructures, server farms, and above all, in the vast network of users who reshape the structures every day. Taken together, they form a living, pulsating entity, one that evolves constantly and fits back into the societies that create it. Within this landscape, Slackspace emerges, zone where creative freedom unfolds beyond institutional control, where users can experiment, appropriate, and repurpose structures in ways unanticipated by their creators. In the chapter titled The Infinity of Copies, published in Myths and Mythologies context, I describe this as a kind of a social alter ego, a cultural personality information. In Barth's sense, it becomes a myth, an avatar that crystallizes our values, our fears, and our aspirations. Even when we interact with models like ChatGPT, we are not merely using tools. We are encountering reflections of ourselves, of who we are and who we want to become as societies. Here, Ludwiński's vision gains a new urgency. What is radical is not simply that art identifies with a process. This was already familiar in the 20th century. But that art increasingly identifies with life itself, dissolving into it. Generative structures make this tangible. They evolve through the tension between programmers, corporations, and users. And they stage creativity both at the level of design and at the level of everyday use. This is where art education must shift its focus. It is no longer about teaching students how to produce works, even works framed in specific contexts, but about engaging critically with living structures that merge art and life. Their coefficient of art is not measured by originality of form, but by the intensity of engagement, social resonance, and transformative potential that arises in the interactions. Recognizing Slack spaces and cultivating awareness of these dynamics enables students to navigate and co-shape these systems, participating in a paradigm shift from artifacts to alter egos, from interpretation to usership, from art in life to art as life. So let us return to the claim I began with. Art education in the age of AI should shift its focus. The crucial question is not what AI produces, but what kinds of relationships it generates and how we perform them. Generative models push us into Ludwiński's final stage, where all paradigms collapse. They invite us into Bourdieu's concept of usership and Wright's framework of new vocabulary, where Slackspace and coefficient of art